All of the best stuff happens in the comments section. And that's really the birthplace for this program. I'm Larry Flick.
I'm Gabe Scherzer.
And this is the comment section where we get down and dirty about all things music. And we want you to get involved. And we'll let you know later on how you can do that. But this is a big one.
Oh, Larry,
I'm
excited about
my
this.
compadre here, he's losing his mind. I'm just gonna hang back. Let's hope the mic doesn't get wet. All right, Gabe, what are we talking about today?
I'm so glad you asked. We are talking about guitarists. We are talking about guitar and guitarists. And it is what a day to be alive.
What a day to be alive. It's one of, was doing some research, and it is one of the most popular polling topics in music. Guitarists. Every music publication has had at least one, if not multiple, polls, critic polls, public polls on who the great guitarists of all time are. And it's a continual fight in various forms of social media. No doubt we're about to thrill and annoy people with our views on great guitarists. It is one of those topics that will never go away, because everybody has. First of all, who doesn't love a list? I live for a list. But people love to talk about guitarists.
Well, not only do people like to talk about guitarists, but people like to absolutely obliterate you for your lists and for who's not who's snubbed. Why am I crazy for not including this person? Why is my taste in music horrible for not including that person? I cannot wait to see what comes from this.
It's going to be good. So now haven't you done some polling and research about this already?
Yes, I have.
In your lifetime?
So one of the things I do on my social media, since I don't really know how to do material about myself, is I tend to get the public's opinion about, sort of what they think about, comparing one guitarist to the other, giving a list and asking what they think about the list. I want to preface this by saying that music is subjective. So yeah, in my sort of attempt to get more interaction with my page on TikTok and on Instagram, I've been posting these polls, and by far the most comments out of any post that I've gotten is when I posted my top guitarists.
All right, so how do we do this? I mean, we gave ourselves the task of coming up with our top 3, which I think it meant you had to have the experience of shooting puppies to whittle it down to 3. Because I had a difficult time, and my list has been evolving literally even as we're speaking. So how do you want to? I like I said, I am just rolling into deep and following you. This is your baby. You tell me what we're doing next, and I will say yes, sir.
Why don't we start by just sort of talking about how we initially got exposed to sort of the world of guitar, who are the first bands or guitarists that we're listening to. And then I think that will really give us a structure and the proper background for, our lists, because every list is made up of all of our influences, right? So let's start at the beginning.
Yeah. Well, I mean, for me, it was as simple as walking in on my dad playing air guitar to Jimi Hendrix. I was born in 1963 to parents who had me at the age of 18, and my dad was a hippie. He was a rock and roll dude, and I learned about rock and roll from my dad. My mom taught me about pop music through her pop and soul music collection. No one in my family has any musical talent, but we've always had music as a constant. And yeah, just walking in and catching my brooding, shy, quiet father riff. He was doing the best arena concert for one to Hendrix was like, oh, I think I was like 6 or 7 when I saw that. And it made me go and listen to his records and listen for that thing that he was imitating. I didn't really at the time know what it was, but I figured it out pretty quickly, and became kind of obsessed with what and how you made those sounds come out of that instrument. And I've been hooked ever since, and for me, the guitar is so many different things, but a great guitarist and a great moment of guitar on a record or in a concert is one that is communicating emotion and words and an idea without the use of voice. The one thing that all of my favorite guitarists, these three and beyond, is that they speak volumes without ever opening their mouths. What about you?
Yeah, it's very interesting. I've always been sort of drawn to the older sounds. My first real exposure to a guitarist was this man right here. It was Jerry Garcia. It was and yes, I do have a picture ready to go.
I was just saying he's got visual aids, y'all. That's fabulous. I love it.
So my exposure really came, from my parents as well, but it was driving in the car. It was, my dad is a big classical music lover, and when we were driving with the family, our rule was essentially you can't play classical music because our family was just not having it. And what it led to was sort of, him, playing us other music that he liked. And what he ended up playing was the Grateful Dead. And I gotta be honest with you, when I was first hearing them, it drove me crazy because there was no discernible structure. I couldn't necessarily tell if we were still in one song or if we were moving to the next song. But what I knew was that it was making me think. And, let's say 5 to 10 years later, I'm rediscovering this music, and I'm rediscovering it with an open mind. And what I found was that those moments where you don't really know what's going on were the moments that were the most beautiful to me. The moments where the music became a complete expression and window into the soul of Mr. Garcia, of the band, but while still making it recognizable, while still playing melodies that reminded you of the songs. It was the first time when I really found that the instrument could move me in such a way. And it also really, I think, instilled in me this desire for spontaneity and for, living in the moment and trying to express myself as truthfully and as honestly as possible.
That's very much what I look for in singers. And so it's very interesting to me that you can get all of that out of the guitar. I mean, like I look for a certain kind of lyricism in instrumental music, but I mean, it's a very powerful connection. So you play, right?
Yeah.
And so when did you start to play?
So I took lessons for about 3 years when I was much younger, probably the ages, I don't know, 8 to 11, something like that. And I I really just didn't care for it. I didn't see the use. I didn't see the appeal. I didn't practice. And so naturally, if you're not practicing and you're not enjoying it, you're not going to stick with it. Um, you know,
Right.
my only my only time during that period performing in front of an audience, um, I dropped the guitar in the middle of my solo.
Oh my God.
Um,
How do you recover from that?
well, the answer is that I stopped playing for about 10 years.
10 years.
That's
That's
a little
trauma.
7 or 8 years.
Wow. But I get it. I would have run off the stage crying. I would have. And I would have moved to another country and shaved my head. I just don't know how I would have recovered from it. I
Yeah,
really don't.
I
That's
think it, I think it
that's insane.
I think it scared me away, and for me that was my big shot, and I blew it. But obviously, as time goes by, you realize that no one remembers that. I was young; it didn't really mean anything, you know.
No, of course.
Um, my desire to play it left after that incident, but my fascination with the instrument remained. And what started happening is I started doing real deep dives on these guitarists who I had heard but never really appreciated. I started doing deep dives into Eric Clapton, deep dives into BB King, um, and at a certain point, I just decided, particularly when I started producing my own music, it's not too late to pick it up again. It's not too late to make this a part of my life. And I picked it up and I never looked back.
Good for you. Good for you. So I think we've made people suffer long enough. I think we need to get into our picks. What do you say?
Let's do it.
All right. So who goes first?
After you.
All right. I've still been, the whole time we've been talking, I've been continuing to make notes because I keep changing my mind. But I think I'm going to settle in on my number 3 pick being perhaps the most controversial, Bonnie Raitt. And I chose Bonnie Raitt because, first of all, women who actually play, and I don't mean like, you know, empty rhythm like Nancy Wilson and Hart does, but people who can hang with the best of the best don't get enough respect. I've seen Bonnie Raitt play many times, and I've always been dazzled by her ability to go from Robert Johnson blues to power chords. She is very, very fluid in the way she moves from one to the next. But I think I'm going to settle in on my number 3 pick being perhaps the most controversial, Bonnie Raitt. And I chose Bonnie Raitt because, first of all, women who actually play, and I don't mean like, you know, empty rhythm like Nancy Wilson and Hart does, but people who can hang with the best of the best don't get enough respect. I've seen Bonnie Raitt play many times, and I've always been dazzled by her ability to go from Robert Johnson blues to power chords. She is very, very fluid in the way she moves from one to the next. Um, her guitar playing always underlines every note she sings, and I think she's mesmerizing with the guitar, particularly on stage, and I don't think she gets enough respect for it. And at 72, 73, she's still on top form as a guitar player. She just put out a record earlier this year that is brilliant, and it's brilliant because it's her leaning into. She kind of moved away from that, let's give them something to talk about pop era that she was in, and go back to where she was before she had all those hits, back to blues guitar. And generally, I'm not a big blues guitar fan, but I think her ability to bring, warmth and joy to the sound is what really works for me.
Do you think that in 2022 a woman can be a successful lead guitarist without singing?
No, because I've watched in the last 5 or 10 years women who were kind of added to big tours, like say the Michael Jackson tour when he was still alive, and a couple of others like that, where they were kind of added as gimmicks, right? It was meant to enhance the whole spectacle of it all, to have a woman play guitar. And then when she went ahead and started putting out records, she had to learn how to sing. She had to bring singers in, and she also had to sex it up.
Sure.
There are very, very, very few women who can just strap on a guitar without pulling their tits out at the same time and just play. I can only think of what Susan Tedeschi is the only one that I think who comes to mind. Everyone else is sort of they have to play the sex card, and I don't see that changing anytime soon.
No, I don't. I agree. I don't think it changes until people make a concerted effort to change it, and I really think it's on successful guitarists. I think they need to step up.
Well, it's also on the people in the industry who give opportunities to bands, right? There's this great song by Amy Ray, who is the dark-haired woman in Indigo Girls, and she has a solo career, mostly as a punk artist, but lately as a bluegrass singer. And about 10, 15 years ago, she put up this scathing track called Lucy Stoners. And it was all about how she and her other female colleagues couldn't get booked because they weren't, quote, fuckable, and they wouldn't play that game. And they called themselves Lucy Stoners who don't care about boners. That was the line in the song. And, it really, it comes down to the bookers, and it comes down to the people who give opportunity and who don't say, tight a t-shirt, pull those tits out, put some lipstick on. But I think it's up to people who sign artists. I think it's up to the bookers at the club level. I think it's up to, I think it's up to the women who are out there buying records, to buy records by women who play guitar. There are women out there who are not playing the sex game. They're just not cutting through because no one's supporting them. And so I think it comes down to, it's out there. You may have to go look for it. As a guy who spends most of his life looking for records, I'm here to tell you, if you want it, it exists. How bad do you want it? Are you willing to look for it? Or are you willing to be just spoon-fed? If you're willing to be spoon-fed, then you're only going to be spoon-fed, a certain kind of female guitarist. I'm dying to hear your number three. I can't wait anymore.
Well, I would also just, before we get to that, I would also just say, if you're listening to this and you have recommendations for women guitarists who need more recognition, who you should listen to, please let us know. We'll talk about it. We'll listen to them, and we will shine.
Exactly.
We will shine a light. That's what we're here for. We know we have a long way to go and a lot to learn, but we're hoping you guys can help us with that. So you brought up Susan Tedeschi, and that leads me to my number three, which is the other half of Tedeschi Trucks, one Mr. Derek Trucks. Derek is a man who is basically born into the Allman Brother family. He started opening for them when he was 11 or 12 and started playing with them not many years afterwards. He is an absolute magician of a slide guitarist. I struggle to think of anyone who comes close to his ability to make that thing sing. I mean, even I think he surpassed Dwayne Allman, RIP, but it's honestly hard to put into words, which is really good for a podcast, I know. But he has his roadmap, his internal roadmap of how to get from point A to point B on the guitar is better than anyone I know. His ability to know where the solo starts, how it's going to build up, and where it's going to end, where that climax is going to be, astonishing. And it's mesmerizing. Have you had a chance to listen to Derek at all?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. And I think he is very, very talented. It's not my go-to sound, but I get it and I respect it, and I've seen him live, and I think that that's really where you need to experience him. I don't think it really, for me, it doesn't come to life on record as the way it does when you're in a room experiencing the communion and the chemistry of him and the audience. I think it's very much an interactive experience with him, and I dig it. Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where you kind of, when I hear him, I always think, God, I should listen to him more. Yeah, very much so. Very much so. All right, my number two, I just added, because I was looking for the right representation of this kind of sound, and I finally thought of it. Because one of my favorite guitar sounds is not in solos, although I enjoy a good solo. It's in power chords, but not necessarily like 80s metal power chords, because those tend to be a little ham-fisted for me. They're fun, always fun. But to me, metal power chords are the same as like a good disco beat. They kind of become just one sound that everyone kind of elects to play, and they're not very distinctive. But I love, and it's very much of an era, the late 70s, 80s era. But to me, it's also it's very timeless. I think it's a sound that, when you say it's of an era, you tend to think, oh, well, it's limited, it's quaint, it's antique after a while. But no, it just brings you back to a certain time. But then you think, God, that is classic. That's timeless. I've seen Mike Campbell on stage with the Heartbreakers, with Stevie Nicks, with a number of other musicians over the years. I mean, like, we're talking in the dozens, and he's always magical. But what's really fascinating about him is that he's very, very low key in his performance. He just plays. You know what I mean? He doesn't look like he's like, having an orgasm as he hits his solos. He's not a showboater. He just relies on his fingers to do the job, and it's magical.
Is that a personal attack at Mr. John Mayer?
Never.
Because if you're talking about someone,
do me a favor. Do me a favor. Come later. It's okay. We don't need to witness that. But anyway, yes, you were going to say.
When I'm listening to you, and I think what's interesting is that you and I think sort of have different. We gravitate towards different parts of what makes a great guitarist. And correct me if I'm wrong, but what it sounds like to me is that you are really drawn to sort of how the guitarist becomes part of the ensemble, how the guitarist adds the structure and becomes the backbone of what makes a great record, not necessarily having that big moment to shine and that moment where the crowd is going crazy.
Yeah, I think so. I think, when you hear my number one, you might change your mind about that. But, for me, particularly someone like Mike Campbell, the fact that he can be the backbone of a record and then rise up with a solo that just rips your heart out. To me, that's a mark of an artist who's in control of his instrument. And to me, a great musician serves the song. And yeah, maybe that's it. Maybe I've never thought about it that way, but I think maybe you're right. If the song is great, then you don't need a whole lot of insanity. You just need someone to serve the song, and then add your sparkle dust to it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. All right, should we go to my number two?
I'm dying.
All right. So I will confess that this number two slot changes quite often. But for right now, my number two, and who used to be my number one, actually, my number two is the man, the myth, the legend, Mr. Eric Clapton. So, and putting aside the personal foibles of the man, let's say, putting aside the drunken racist rant, putting aside.
I was going to say, he's not the nicest guy, but, fair enough.
putting aside the anti-vax sentiment, putting aside all that. What the man has done with the art form of the blues has been so magical to see. He was never the fastest player. He was never the loudest player. But what he was able to do is he could play the same note in the same string bend 10 times in a row. And by the 10th time he plays it, the crowd is going crazy. He had a way of assigning so much value to each note that he played in a way that is remarkable and in a way that has inspired the next generation of guitar.
I respect him, but meh. And it has nothing to do with his personality.
Yeah.
It has nothing to do with his personality. For me, I get the same thing that you just described from Jeff Beck.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Jeff Beck's a little bit more, feels a slight bit more imaginative. And I know I'm in a minority on this one. And again, I swear, it's nothing to do with his personality. Because I don't really care. I care, but I don't care. You know what I mean? I can still respect your skill, and I do respect his accomplishments. I've seen him play a number of times. I understand, the hero worship that he has enjoyed his whole life, and I don't begrudge that. But yeah, it just kind of
Didn't speak to you, didn't make you feel.
it doesn't make me. That's it. It doesn't make me feel anything other than, wow, you're really good at that.
Yep.
Yeah, that you're very good at this, young Gabriel. He really did. Yeah, I think, wow, are you talented? Wow, I feel nothing.
That, and that is such a valid, thought. I mean, that's how I feel about Eddie Van Halen. I mean,
Yeah, and I get that about Eddie as well.
I mean, the man is one of the most technically gifted players of all time, but he never made me feel. And for me, it's all about that.
Yeah, the thing I always liked about Eddie is again the crunchiness. Like I said, I like power chords, right? So I like the crunchiness, and I like and I like the fact that the band was structured in a way that, if we're all this thing about Sammy Hagar versus Eddie Van Halen, did I say Eddie Van? I meant David Lee Roth. All the stuff about Sammy Hagar versus David Lee Roth is all kind of nonsense, because the real lead singer of Van Halen has always been Eddie Van Halen's fingers. And the songs are really structured that way, where the vocals played second to his guitar. And I like that. And that's kind of what made me a big, big fan of Van Halen. But I find that my favorite Van Halen songs are the groove-oriented ones. Like, I always really like Pound Cake. And I think it's because of the way he kind of like wove himself around the bass line, and it became very Zeppelin-esque. But I totally get you.
Yeah, I mean,
I could see how in some ways Eddie Van Halen's riffing was very clinical.
It's clinical, and for me, when I said it's all about the feel, that's true, but there's no doubting that the technical ability and ability to play speed is important. Is important to make someone feel with the instrument, right? To make someone go to that place of sort of, that transcendent experience where you're just sort of lost in the music. That's really what I'm looking for. And, when we get to my number one, I'll talk about the man who blended the technical prowess with the ability to make someone feel just so brilliantly. So I'm excited to get there.
All right, well then let's get there. Let me tell you my number one. You already know who this is, because we've talked about him a little bit off mic. It's Lindsey Buckingham. I've never seen anyone do with a guitar what he does. And he usually does it without a pick, which I think is really interesting, because I know that's hard. He has this ability to play very nimble acoustic lines. At heart, I'm an acoustic folk country music listener, and his acoustic work is bar none. But I will tell you, it's funny because I still believe that most great guitar players come to life on stage. I had a transcendent experience when I saw Fleetwood Mac on the Tusk tour. Long before you were born, my young fella, because I was just a teenager at the time. And he did a song called "I'm So Afraid," which is not very much of a song. It's basically two verses and a 3-sentence chorus. But it in concert, it goes into this 8 minutes where it's no vocals. It's just Lindsay, John McVie, Mick Fleetwood, and Christine McVie jamming. And what he did with his guitar, and it's been recorded, and there's a live album. The live album that came after Tusk is worth listening to for all of Lindsay's live work, which never is not at all indicated on any of his studio work, because his studio work is very plucky, very picky, and very concise. On stage, he likes a long, luxurious riff. And there was one point where he played just one solo for about 2 minutes that made me, I just the only time it's ever happened, it literally brought tears to my eyes, because he played it as if he was in the deepest pain of his life. And he poured a lifetime of angst and trauma into that riff. And I was like, this is what it's all about. And I went to the show to see Stevie, because she's one of my favorite artists. And I left devoted to all things Lindsay. And I've since seen him in concert about 5 or 6 times. His solo tours are next to none. They're so good, because he dances back and forth between these long, luxurious riffing moments and the plucking and the picking and all that. He makes his guitar speak. It speaks, it sings, it cries, it flirts, and I've never heard anyone do with a guitar what he's done. Never. Like, I couldn't sit here and go, like, when you were talking about Eric Clapton, I could say, oh, well, Jeff Beck does the same thing for me, even though he doesn't. For me, it's similar. I'll just go there. I could listen to Bonnie Raitt, but I could also listen to Susan Tedeschi and get a similar experience. No one can give me the Lindsey Buckingham experience. I'm just obsessed with her.
So
and he's kind of a douche, so it's not a personality thing, because he's kind of a douche. But anyway, go ahead.
so many of them are.
Yes.
So back in 2015, Rolling Stones came out with this 100 greatest guitarists of all time list, which inevitably led to, a lot of conversations like the ones we're having right now. But on that list, they rank, of the top 100, they rank the 100th best guitarist as Lindsey Buckingham.
I know.
I'm wondering why, if you can put into words, why the recognition isn't there. Or is that enough? Or is I mean, you could say being, the 100th best of all time is more than enough recognition.
I mean, being on the list is good enough, but I think it in large part is what I was saying earlier. His best guitar work doesn't always turn up on his records. It tends to turn up more in his performances, in his concerts. Whereas, his recordings are so labored and so steeped and reverent of Brian Wilson and surf punk, and the guitar is, like I said before, very plucky, very picky. Not. I mean, it's dexterous, but it's not showy. He kind of, his arrangements tend to be more mosaic. Even Fleetwood Mac, that was really one of the several times that he left the band, is because they were like, listen, you're trying to turn us into a painting, a Picasso, like a Sidney Pollock painting, and we want to be a band. And, his guitar playing really, the kind of guitar playing that Pole embraced, and I think that really turns a lot of people on, is what happens when he's playing in concert. He doesn't put that on in a studio, and I don't know why. I've interviewed him twice. He's he's kind of douchey to other people. He was very nice to me, because he knew I was such a fan. And we talked about it, and he's just like, it just doesn't happen in the studio. He's very kind of like, guided by muses and ideas. And I think that's it. I think it's because unless you could say, oh, in 79 and 1982 on the Tusk tour, he did this solo and it ripped my heart out. Unless you can say that, you're not going to know that he's capable of that.
Yeah, that's so interesting. You talk about sort of him not necessarily feeling like in the studio is his time to shine. It reminds me of I had to bring in Mayer at some point. I was watching a John Mayer interview, and he was asked, how sort of playing with Dead and Company and playing the role of Jerry Garcia has, affected his solo touring and the music he makes. And what he said, which was interesting, was that he when he's playing his own music, he's a little bit limited in sort of the notes that he's able to play. It's more so learning the solos exactly as they're recorded. It's playing notes that are only, and not to get too technical, but it's playing notes that are within the blues scale, and that his audience is going to hear and think, oh yeah, that makes sense, right? Whereas when he gets to play with Dead and Company, which is when I've seen him play his best guitar ever, he can sort of just be free and, the whole go as he will and let his mind just sort of explode and let his fingers move without really thinking. So there's really an audience for both, but I wonder if it's even possible anymore to be commercially successful as a guitarist who isn't trying to be accessible. Because when I think of the greatest guitarists, they didn't care. They didn't give a shit if they were accessible. They were going to play their hearts out and let the public decide.
Yeah. I don't think we live in that era anymore. I think the 80s started to shift that. When we moved from the dominance of metal as the most successful form of rock and roll commercially to grunge, which was more punk-like and more, did they know how to play? Did they not know how to play? I don't know. That same poll the Rolling Stone poll that you made reference to, ranked Kurt Cobain much higher on the list. And, I would say many things about Kurt Cobain, one of the greats of our generation, maybe of all generations, but his guitar work would not be part of it, so I think that there's also there's the fact that as tastes have changed, so has what is applicable to music. And and Lindsay participated in that, even with like Big Love, which is very much a very specific sounding record. And if you see him do Big Love live, he doesn't do it with the band ever. It's a solo acoustic tour de force where he is playing all these different chords, including solos, without a pick on an acoustic guitar, and it explodes and it has virtually a full band sound, but it doesn't sound like the record. It's a guitar tour de force. And I think he would acknowledge that if he recorded that in the studio for the band, they would probably veto it, and the label would probably veto it. And so he's like, okay, I'm going to keep that in my hip pocket for when we go out on the road. And I think that's what has happened. I think where we are now is very much, dual personality.
We could talk about this for hours. I think a whole separate conversation we're going to need to have is the changing importance that is being placed on people who are just really gifted at the instrument. Yeah. I mean,
okay, enough.
How it fits
enough.
In. Anyway.
Stop.
All right,
stop.
let's go
enough edging. Give it to me.
All right.
Give it to me, baby. What's your number one?
So before I give it to you,
I'm reach through this phone and strangle you.
I need to preface this by saying the man doesn't exist without Albert King. The man doesn't exist without Jimi Hendrix. My number one is Mr. Stevie Ray Vaughan.
Oh my God, I'm gonna faint.
Stevie Ray Vaughan.
Wait. Yes. Stevie Ray Vaughan.
Yes.
Not John Mayer.
No.
All right now. Okay, I'm sitting up straight and I'm listening. Go on.
I mean, don't get me wrong. He's on my top 10 list. But
yeah. Okay. I am officially gooped. Go on.
I got to keep you on your toes. I got to keep you on your toes.
You were keeping me on my toes. You're keeping me on my toes. Stevie Ray Vaughan is a genius. Go on, please.
Absolute genius.
I'm a happy man now. Go on.
I mean, the man took the style of Jimi Hendrix, the power of Albert King, and combined it with his magical mind, and was just able to play the instrument in a way that I don't think anyone else will ever be able to. And not that many people know this, and this is sort of a little non sequitur for the guitarists out there, but he actually, the strings he used were actually not normal strings. He used much stiffer strings, but he still was able to play so hard and so many notes that he actually, like, his fingertips would literally be bleeding or like the skin would be falling off after some performances. And yet, with that incredible intensity, the man knew exactly when to not play. He knew exactly when to play so delicately, when to play so gently. I mean, I consider Lenny to be the greatest guitar track of all time. The man just goes places that no one else does. And he is reserved in the exact right moments, and he is powerful in the exact right moments. And there's no John Mayer without Stevie Ray Vaughan. And, there's lots of other artists that are incredibly inspired, but I don't think anyone has come close to his intensity and technical mastery combined with the ability to make the listener feel. And so he checks all three of my boxes, and that's why he's my number one.
Well, that is a supremely good number one. I'm so grateful to say I saw him in concert once, and it was an exceptional night. You just stand there, mouth agape, in his presence. What a choice. So co-sign that. You're right. You cannot have a lot of the people we've talked about without Stevie Ray Vaughan. Even those who came, who were older than him, who came before him, technically, chronologically, they became better once they became knowledgeable and absorbed his music and his artistry. Just exceptional, and it's a loss we'll never recover from.
And again,
not having him making records right now.
Of course, and the guitar world will kill me if I don't once again bring up there is no Stevie Ray Vaughan without Jimi Hendrix. I simply think, just like there's no John Mayer without Stevie Ray Vaughan, I just believe that Stevie took the style and he perfected it, and he made it his own, and he made it exceptionally beautiful.
Well, I think we have given people so much to chew on and a lot to debate about.
I hope there are more nerds.
And a lot what?
I hope there are more nerds out there. More nerds.
I know for a fact there are more nerds out there. And we want to hear from all of them. We want to hear from you. Let us know who your top three are. and how wrong we are, how right we are. I accept the fact that I did not come down the most traditional path with my picks, but I hope I made a good case for them. Whereas you came with passion and knowledge, and I'm going to listen to these guitarists differently because of how you spoke about them. And it's not done. This is what we call a thread, right? It's in any good comment section. It's a thread, and we'll be picking this up very soon. What do you think?
I think we're gonna have to.
I think we're gonna have to. But until then, I'm Larry Blick.
I'm Gabe Scherzer.
And we'll see you in the comments section.